My name is Gary Maixner. I'm a librarian actually at Indiana University in Indianapolis, formerly Indiana University, Purdue, Indiana, or Purdue University, Indianapolis. And I'm joined by my colleague Jason Peercy, who also works at the library and is also a writer, primarily writes for Dungeons and Dragons and RPG supplements and things like that. So today we're going to be talking about the power of ensembles, so specifically how Warhammer novels are structured and how that adds to their readability. So to get started, we are specifically going to be talking about Black Library with this talk, not codexes or battle tomes or anything like that. We're really focused on the novels and the structure of the novels for all of this. And there's several problems that genre fiction needs to sort of ascend or break through in order to be accessible to readers, right? You can kind of think about this in terms of a learning curve for the genre or for the setting, where someone, as they get more exposure to the setting, will have more knowledge about the setting. And so you can play with, you can assume more knowledge from more experienced readers, and you can also begin to subvert some of their expectations and their ideas. Warhammer in 40K in particular is interesting because there are so many novels and there's so many entry points for the setting that it needs to have the assumption that anyone might be coming to the setting for the first time in any work that they publish. But it's also a strength of it because there's so much out there and so many auxiliary texts either created by fans or in other mediums that people can use to expand their knowledge base. But anyone working in genre fiction needs to kind of get over this hump, this learning curve in introducing their world and what's important to the world.
So from this, we've discovered there are roughly two types of readers. It's kind of understood, right? They're the brand new readers and they're the experienced readers. Now, this isn't definitely, one's in one bucket and one's in another bucket. It's kind of a spectrum, right? Because some people, for example, they might know a lot about the salamanders, but they may know less about Death Watch. So it just depends upon how familiar that reader is. But for this exercise and this talk, let's assume they're brand new readers and they're experienced readers. So the brand new readers, they need to be introduced to the universe of Warhammer 40K somehow. They want to get into the stories and lore of this universe and discover how deep it goes. And they may not have any concept of any of the factions that exist out there at all. Compared to the experienced readers, they don't really need an introduction to the overall world of 40K, and they want to be immersed in the story itself, get right into it, and just feel that they're there. They're also actively seeking out specific faction stories to read about.
One of the other issues that you can see in genre fiction is sort of a lack of tension and stakes for any one character. So I put a picture of The Martian by Andy Weir here, if anyone has read that or seen the film. The whole structure of the novel is around one man surviving on Mars on his own. Reading the book, a book, physical item in your hand, you can see how many pages you have left. So you know that there are not going to be any serious setbacks to this person's life. They're not going to die in the middle of the book, right? Because they are the driving force. They are the main character. It also can lead to a problem where, especially in genre fiction, science fiction, and fantasy, where the main character might have a gadget or a get out of jail free card that the reader isn't aware of, and they're able to produce this to overcome whatever issue they have, right?
Considering that difficulty in the lack of tension and stakes for the world itself. It all becomes about the characters. And how does the Black Library solve this issue? Well, they've landed on multiperspectivity. Now, it's multiperspectivity, also known as polyperspectivity. It's a literary device. It allows the story of the world to be told by the characters themselves, and you're seeing their experience within it as it goes through the entirety of the set of books.
So,
So this produces, sorry, Gary.
yeah,
um, I'm hoping everyone can hear me as well.
yeah.
So this produces the Watson effect, right? Where the character is actually more like an audience surrogate. They're asking the questions the audience might be thinking. They kind of start as clueless, not all of them, but the idea is there is something they don't know or something that they're discovering, and the audience is discovering with it as they read from the start of the story. Other examples of these types of characters are Frodo in Lord of the Rings, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, and Paul in Dune. So this allows the characters to discover the world, this sort of writing. It allows the reader to discover the world, but it also allows old readers to take in a new perspective that they may have not considered yet from this character.
Yeah. And one of the things that I find particularly interesting with Back Library is because all of the characters live in the world, they don't act completely as an audience surrogate all the time, instead sort of act as a pseudo audience surrogate or a pseudo Watson, in that they are used as vehicles to introduce different aspects of the universe to the reader in sort of small ways, kind of dull it out. Um, I chose Dark Apostle. This was the first 40K novel I read. I got it at a used bookstore. Um, and every character in that book can be used in this kind of literary way to expand on the knowledge that a reader has, right? Whether that be Marduk in the Chaos Space Marines, and you get to see how they take over a planet, or even talk about things like the multiple hearts that they have, these like little introductory things that they add to it.
This really allows the Black Library to make the universe bigger than any one character. You are reading about all of these various characters through all of their trials and tribulations, and truly rarely in the background does the world change, but it occasionally does. And this is a very unique and interesting device, using story as world building instead of just as character building for character arcs. So while the novels are very character driven about what that individual is experiencing or what these various individuals are experiencing and how the story is told together, it also uses this device to build out the world even further and give you a greater understanding of what is happening in the moment in the world of 40K. Other authors that use this are George R. R. Martin, and just Tolkien as well, with how he was telling the tale of the Hobbit, was using this to build that world. So they're really drawing upon what has come before to extend the world of the Black Library, extend the world of 40K, and give new readers and old readers a very fun perspective.
And speaking of tension, of course, within genre fiction, using multi-perspectivity, where each character is kind of looked at in this third-person limited way, allows for tension between the individual characters that the reader is privy to, but the characters themselves are not. So we can see tensions rising within characters when they have disagreements, when they have different sets of knowledge, and just different ideas on how the universe should function. It allows for that. It also means that stakes can be dire for characters because we're not married to any one or two main characters necessarily. Um, any character can be, either killed or taken out of the story in some pretty extreme ways. So some examples from the Horus Heresy book here. I also went through with the Dark Apostle book, and took note of every time a perspective shifted and which chapters those appear in, and then kept note of when dire consequences happened to those characters. One of the interesting things I discovered with this is there's sort of this in using multi-perspectivity, there are plenty of times where a character is introduced in a chapter just to be killed in that chapter to add a little extra drama to it, but that's not always the case, right? So we have several named characters here that were introduced and killed in chapters 3 and 4. But if we could go further, we can see characters like Havern and Varnus, who we did follow their perspectives several times in the story, did face dire consequences by the end, right? Even the character Bokar, who only had one sort of perspective shift, was still mentioned throughout the story by name. This multi-perspectivity also provides a framework for, like Jason said, introducing new elements to the universe. So if a writer needs to create another planet or populate another world, they already have this framework in which to slowly roll out the rules for that planet. Typically the Black Library doesn't deal too much with like multiple gravity and or changes in gravity or things like that, but it would allow for those kinds of things. Some planets might be more arid, the classic snow-covered planets, all of that can be introduced to the reader in a more natural way.
And to consider when working with a major IP, you do have limitations. As we heard in the talk before, Warhammer has quite a few limitations. So we believe this is an excellent way and an excellent method for authors to introduce the world, introduce new ideas where they can and when they can in this great, large context of the game and of the literary work. This also rewards an informed audience. It makes references to other factions and lore that can include an astute reader on coming plot threads or where the story is going to go. And since each lore dump is as small, it gets it out of the way for experienced fans. They say, this is a new place, this is a new thing. We like it, we understand this, or they don't, right? It all depends on when it gets in their hands. But it makes it very easy for new things to come in, and easy is the wrong word, a much more interesting way for new information to come into the world than simply rewriting everything. They can keep what has happened before, they can introduce new stuff, and people who are used to it latch onto it very, very quickly.
All right, and then we've got plenty of time for questions. Here's our contact information. If you'd like to reach out and talk about things.